Keisha Robinson was 3 episodes deep into a true crime podcast, elbow deep in a bag of spicy chips, when she noticed the black SUV for the second time that week. She almost didn't. It was parked exactly where it had been parked on Tuesday, across from her apartment building in Itaewon, windows tinted dark enough to be either extremely rich or extremely suspicious. And in Seoul, Keisha had learned it was usually one or the other. Okay, she muttered to herself, pausing her podcast. Either that's the world's most dedicated Uber driver, or I'm about to become the subject of my own true crime episode. She was not wrong to be suspicious. She just had absolutely no idea how right she actually was. 2 men sat in that SUV, and had been sitting in variations of that SUV for 4 days, on the very specific orders of a man named Choi Dae, sung mid-level enforcer for the BWAM organization. A man who took his job extremely seriously and, as it would later become clear to literally everyone involved, was extremely bad at it. Are we sure this is her? The younger of the 2 men, a nervous 20-something named Min Jun, asked for what was possibly the 90th time that week. The photo matches, the older one, Deok-gu, said, holding up a grainy printed image on his phone. Black woman, mid-20s, lives in this building, works nights. It's her. The photo is blurry, Hyung. Photos are always blurry. That's what makes them mysterious. That's not what makes photos mysterious. That's just bad photography. What neither man knew, what nobody in the entire BWAM organization had bothered to properly verify, was that the surveillance photo in question had been taken outside a nightclub 11 months ago, of an entirely different black woman, a South African diplomat's aide named Namvula, who was currently living in Brussels and had absolutely nothing to do with Seoul, the BWAM organization, or Keisha Robinson's Tuesday night chip consumption whatsoever. Somewhere between a badly cropped photo, a rushed briefing, and a junior analyst who really should have double-checked his facial recognition software, an innocent elementary school English teacher from Houston, Texas, had become, in the eyes of a moderately dangerous criminal organization, a suspected courier for a rival syndicate. Keisha, of course, knew none of this. She just knew there was a suspicious car outside her building for the second time in a week, and she was, by nature, not a woman who let suspicious things go unaddressed. You know what? She said, setting down her chips with the particular resolve of someone who has decided, against every rational instinct, to make a terrible decision. I'm going to go ask them what their deal is. She grabbed her keys, marched down 3 flights of stairs, crossed the street in her pajama pants and an oversized Beyonce concert t-shirt, and knocked directly on the SUV's tinted window. Inside the car, Min Jun nearly had a heart attack. Hyung, he whispered, frozen. Hyung, she's knocking on the window. Don't panic, Deok-gu whispered back. Panicking? You said don't panic while panicking. I'm not panicking, I'm strategizing. That is a panic voice. The window rolled down slowly, revealing 2 grown men in expensive black suits looking, for all their training and reputation, absolutely terrified of a woman in pajama pants holding a half-eaten bag of chips. Evening, gentlemen, Keisha said, arms crossed, chip bag dangling from one finger like a weapon she was fully prepared to deploy. I don't know what y'all are doing out here, but this is the second time this week you've parked outside my building looking like extras from a K-drama. And I need you to know I've watched enough true crime to know exactly how this ends for me if I don't say something now. Deok-gu opened his mouth. Nothing came out. So, Keisha continued, undeterred, either you tell me right now why you're watching my building, or I'm calling the police, posting your license plate on every group chat I'm in, and live streaming this entire interaction to my 400 TikTok followers, who, I promise you, are extremely nosy people. There was a long, deeply uncomfortable silence. We are conducting routine surveillance, Deok-gu finally managed, in the tone of a man who had never once, in his professional career, needed to explain routine surveillance to the actual surveillance target. Surveillance of what? Keisha said flatly. Me? Baby, I teach 3rd grade English to 8-year-olds and I have not left my apartment in 4 days except for chips. What could you possibly be surveilling? Min Jun, in the passenger seat, made a strangled noise that might have been the beginning of a laugh, quickly disguised as a cough. Deok-goo's phone rang at that exact moment, a call he would later describe, in his official incident report, as the single most inconvenient phone call of my professional life. He glanced at the screen. His face went pale. "I need to take this," he said quickly, rolling the window most of the way back up, leaving just enough gap to add, "Please do not call the police. We will explain everything. Just 5 minutes." He answered the call with visibly shaking hands. "Boss," he said, "we may have a small situation." On the other end of the line, in an office 12 miles away, Kwon Ji-hoon, the actual Korean Mafia boss, this entire operation technically belonged to, set down his pen slowly. "What kind of small situation?" he asked, in the tone of a man who had learned, through years of painful experience, that his men's definition of small was almost never accurate. "The surveillance target," Deok-goo said carefully. She's currently standing outside the car, knocking on the window, threatening to live stream us to her TikTok followers." There was a long silence on the line. "I'm sorry," Ji-hoon said slowly. "She's doing what?" "Hey, before we go any further, welcome back if this is a regular stop for you. And if you're new here, I'm glad you found us. Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one, and I genuinely love seeing how far this little corner of the internet reaches. Now, full disclosure, this one gets ridiculous before it gets romantic. You're about to meet a mafia boss who has absolutely no idea how to explain the situation to his own men, let alone to the woman they accidentally targeted. But stick with me, because the moment he actually shows up in person, that's when the story stops being funny and starts being something else entirely. Subscribe now, if you don't want to miss it. Okay, back to that SUV. Kwon Ji-hoon arrived at Keisha's building 11 minutes later, still buttoning his jacket in the back seat of his car, running through several different opening lines in his head and discarding every single one of them as inadequate. "My apologies. We mistook you for a courier," felt insufficient. "This has all been a terrible misunderstanding," felt like something a villain says right before the plot twist. "Please don't call the police. I promise I'm only moderately dangerous," felt somehow even worse. He stepped out of the car to find the scene had, if anything, escalated. Keisha now stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, phone held up, and visibly recording, while Deok-gu and Min-jun stood beside the SUV looking like two men facing a firing squad they fully deserved. "Oh good," Keisha said, spotting Ji-hoon approaching in his sharp black suit. "Is this the manager? Because I have several complaints about the customer service at this establishment. And by establishment, I mean whatever weird surveillance company y'all are running." Ji-hoon stopped a respectful distance away, hands visible, the careful, non-threatening posture of a man who had clearly been briefed, somewhere in the last 11 minutes, on exactly how badly this could go if he mishandled the next 30 seconds. "Miss Robinson," he said carefully, "my name is Kwon Ji-hoon. I owe you an explanation, and an apology. You know my name," Keisha said, her eyes narrowing. "That is not making this better, sir. That is making this significantly worse." "I understand," Ji-hoon said quickly. "Please, there's been a case of mistaken identity. A photograph was misidentified. My men believed you were someone else entirely, someone connected to a business matter I'd rather not elaborate on in detail, but I promise you, it has nothing to do with you personally. And the surveillance ends tonight." Keisha studied him for a long moment, phone still recording, chip bag still dangling threateningly from one finger. "A business matter you'd rather not elaborate on," she repeated slowly. "Sir? Do you understand how that sentence sounds coming from a man who just had 2 grown adults sitting outside my apartment for 4 days? "I do," Ji-hoon admitted. "I understand completely how alarming this must have been." "Alarming doesn't begin to cover it," Keisha said. "I have a group chat with 11 women back in Houston who are convinced, as of about 6 minutes ago, that I am either being trafficked, recruited into a cult, or about to become a Netflix documentary. Do you understand the amount of texting I'm going to have to do tonight to walk that back?" Despite himself, despite the genuine severity of the situation, something in Ji-hoon's carefully composed expression flickered the beginning of something that might, in a different context, have been amusement. I apologize for the group chat as well, he said. You should, Keisha said. But something in her posture shifted slightly, some of the sharp edge softening as she took in his genuine, if slightly awkward, contrition. So who did you actually think I was? Because I need to know if I have a doppelganger running around Seoul causing trouble, because that would actually be useful information. A woman connected to a rival business associate, Ji-hoon said carefully. The photograph used to identify you was, evidently, of very poor quality. And my analysts made an error that should never have happened. So basically, Keisha said, your company's version of quality control is a blurry picture and vibes. That is, Ji-hoon said, an unfortunately accurate summary. Yes, behind him, Min-jun made another small strangled noise, quickly disguised as adjusting his collar. Keisha finally lowered her phone, though she didn't stop recording entirely, the particular caution of a woman who had grown up hearing every possible variation of trust me from people who absolutely should not have been trusted. Okay, she said slowly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me something in writing, an actual apology, on actual letterhead. Whatever weird corporate structure your surveillance company has, confirming this was a mistake, confirming I'm not on some list somewhere, and confirming these two are never coming back to this building again. I can arrange that, Ji-hoon said. And, Keisha continued, you're going to explain to me, in actual detail, not vague business matter language, exactly what kind of company thinks it's normal to surveil random women based on blurry photos. Because either you tell me the truth right now, Mr. Kwon, or I'm walking straight to that police station 3 blocks from here, and I promise you, I have an excellent memory for license plates. Ji-hoon looked at her for a long moment, this woman standing on a Seoul sidewalk in pajama pants and a Beyonce t-shirt, phone still recording, utterly unintimidated by 2 armed men, an entire surveillance operation. Or, apparently, him, and felt something shift unexpectedly in his chest. Something that had nothing to do with damage control, and everything to do with the fact that he had never, in his entire adult life, met anyone who spoke to him quite like this. Would you be willing, he said carefully, to have this conversation somewhere more comfortable than a sidewalk? There's a cafe 2 streets over. I'll answer every question you have, honestly, and I'll have the written apology delivered to you by morning either way. Keisha studied him for a long moment, weighing the offer, weighing the very real fact that this man was, by his own admission, connected to something involving armed surveillance and rival business associates that sounded significantly less like business and significantly more like something her true crime podcasts had extensively covered. Fine, she said finally. But I'm ordering the most expensive thing on the menu, and if you try anything weird, I promise you, my scream is professionally trained. I did 2 years of community theater. Something in Ji-hoon's expression finally, fully cracked into something like a genuine, startled smile and expression, Deok-gu would later note privately to Min-jun, that none of them had seen on their boss's face in over a year. Duly noted, Ji-hoon said. Community theater scream. I'll keep my distance accordingly. The cafe was small, warmly lit, mostly empty at this hour, and Keisha chose the table nearest the exit with the deliberate precision of a woman who had, indeed, watched an alarming amount of true crime television. Okay, she said, sliding into her seat, ordering the most expensive pastry on the menu exactly as promised. Talk, and I mean actually talk, not whatever corporate speak you were doing on the sidewalk. Ji-hoon sat across from her, considering, for a long moment, exactly how much truth the situation actually required. I run several companies, he said carefully. Shipping, logistics, import-export, legitimate businesses, on paper, and largely in practice. Largely, Keisha repeated. That word is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. There are aspects of my work, Ji-hoon continued, that exist in less regulated spaces. Disputes with associates who don't always resolve conflicts through conventional business channels. Keisha stared at him, slowly setting down the pastry she'd been about to bite into. Are you telling me you're in the Mafia? I would phrase it differently, Ji-hoon said. How would you phrase it? I run an organization that occasionally requires surveillance capabilities and, on rare occasions, security measures that exceed what a typical shipping company would need. That's Mafia, Keisha said flatly. That's just Mafia with extra steps. Ji-hoon considered this. That may be a fair characterization, yes. Keisha sat back in her chair, processing this with the particular stunned silence of a woman whose Tuesday evening had gone from spicy chips and a podcast to sitting across from an actual self-admitted mafia boss in an actual cafe, 3 blocks from her actual apartment. Okay, she said slowly. So let me get this straight. You thought I was somebody else, some woman connected to your rival mafia business because of a blurry photo, and you had 2 men sitting outside my building for 4 days, and if I hadn't marched outside in my pajama pants tonight, they would have just kept sitting there, watching me eat chips and listen to true crime podcasts, indefinitely? That is, unfortunately, an accurate summary, Ji-hoon admitted. Do you understand, Keisha said, how close I came to becoming an actual true crime podcast episode? Because I have listened to enough of these to know exactly how this story usually starts. Suspicious car outside the building is like step 1. Step 1, Miss Kwon. I understand the concern, Ji-hoon said. Something almost apologetic entering his voice, though Keisha noticed, with some irritation, that he also seemed to be fighting the corner of a smile. Are you laughing right now? She demanded. No, Ji-hoon said, failing slightly to suppress the smile. I am simply appreciating the specificity of your true crime references. This is not funny, sir. You're right, he said, straightening his expression with visible effort. It's not funny. It's a serious failure of operational procedure, and I intend to personally review how a case of mistaken identity like this happened, so it never happens again. To you or to anyone else. Keisha studied him carefully. Some of her earlier fury giving way to genuine curiosity now that the immediate danger had, apparently, passed. Who did you actually think I was? You said a woman connected to your rival what, exactly? A courier, Ji-hoon said. For an organization I've had ongoing disputes with. The photograph identifying her was poor quality, taken from a distance, at night. My analysts matched it to you based on general similarities: height, complexion, neighborhood proximity to a location she was once seen near. He paused. It was, in retrospect, an embarrassingly thin basis for 4 days of surveillance. You think? Keisha said. Mr. Kwon, I am from Houston, Texas. I teach 3rd grade English. My most dangerous activity this month was arguing with my downstairs neighbor about recycling day. I promise you, whoever your actual courier is, she is having a very different Tuesday than the one I'm currently having. Something in Ji-hoon's expression shifted, genuine attention sharpening behind his dark eyes as he watched her, not just listening to what she was saying, but actually watching her. In a way Keisha found both unsettling and, despite every rational instinct telling her not to notice, faintly flattering. Can I ask you something? He said finally. You've already ruined my week, Mr. Kwon. Might as well keep going. Why didn't you call the police immediately? Most people, discovering unmarked vehicles surveilling their apartment for days, would go straight to authorities rather than confronting the vehicle directly. Keisha considered the question seriously, some of her earlier bravado softening into something more honest. Because where I'm from, calling the police doesn't always go the way it's supposed to go, especially not for someone who looks like me. I've learned to handle things myself when I can, before involving people who might make the situation worse instead of better. She shrugged, though something guarded flickered behind the gesture. Besides, in my experience, people who are actually dangerous don't usually respond well to being confronted directly. You did. That told me something. Ji-hoon absorbed this, something in his expression settling into quiet, genuine respect. That was remarkably perceptive, given the circumstances. I contain multitudes, Keisha said, finally taking a bite of her pastry, some of the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. So, what happens now? You give me my written apology, your guys stop stalking my building, and we all go back to our very different lives? That's the plan, Ji-hoon said. Then, after a pause he seemed slightly surprised by himself, added, unless you'd be willing to let me make this up to you properly. Dinner, perhaps, somewhere considerably nicer than a cafe at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday. Keisha raised an eyebrow, setting down her fork. Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Mafia boss? After surveilling my apartment for 4 days? When you phrase it that way, Ji-hoon said, it sounds considerably worse than I intended. It sounds exactly as bad as it actually is, Keisha said. But something in her voice had shifted, the sharp edge of genuine anger giving way to something more amused, more curious, despite every reasonable instinct telling her this entire situation should end here. Tonight, with a written apology and a firm goodbye. I promise, Ji-hoon said, no surveillance vehicles will be involved in the planning of any future dinner. Keisha laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her despite herself, and Ji-hoon felt something in his chest loosen at the sound of it, something he hadn't expected walking into this cafe 20 minutes earlier with nothing but damage control on his mind. I must be out of my mind, she said, shaking her head. Fine, one dinner. But if there is a single suspicious vehicle anywhere near that restaurant, I am calling every news station in Seoul, and I will make sure your face is on every channel by morning. Understood, Ji-hoon said, something warm and genuine breaking through his usual careful composure. No surveillance, just dinner. Neither of them noticed, in that moment, the man sitting 3 tables away, quietly photographing their entire exchange on his phone, a man who worked, as it happened, for the very rival organization whose courier Keisha had originally, mistakenly, been confused for. 3 days later, Keisha sat across from Ji-hoon at a restaurant so upscale she'd had to Google how to pronounce half the menu items. Still not entirely convinced this whole situation wasn't an elaborate scam she'd somehow talked herself into. Okay, she said, setting down a menu with prices that made her want to lie down. I need you to understand something. If you order for me without asking, I am leaving. I don't care how nice this place is. Duly noted, Ji-hoon said, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Though I should mention, I've never actually taken anyone here before. Is that supposed to impress me? I genuinely don't know, he admitted. I don't have much practice at this. At dating? At any of it, Ji-hoon said. Restaurants that aren't business dinners, conversations that aren't negotiations. He paused, something more vulnerable entering his voice. You'll have to forgive me if I'm somewhat out of practice. Keisha studied him, some of her earlier wariness softening despite herself. There was something almost endearing about a man who ran, by his own admission, a criminal empire, sitting across from her looking genuinely nervous about ordering appetizers. You know, she said, for a mafia boss, you're kind of a dork. I've been told that exact thing, Ji-hoon said. Though usually by Hae-won, my head of security, and usually with considerably less affection. They fell into an easy, surprising rhythm over dinner, Keisha telling stories about her third graders, including one memorable incident involving a classroom hamster and an unauthorized field trip attempt. Ji-hoon carefully navigating which parts of his actual life he could discuss without technically incriminating himself, which turned out to require more creativity than either of them expected. So, what do you actually do all day? Keisha asked, halfway through a dish she couldn't pronounce but was thoroughly enjoying, besides accidentally surveilling innocent school teachers. Meetings, mostly, Ji-hoon said. Negotiations, managing disputes between people who don't always want to be managed. That sounds exhausting. It is, he admitted, something tired entering his voice. I don't often get evenings like this. Simple ones. This is not simple, sir, Keisha said. This is the most expensive dinner I've ever eaten, following the most terrifying week of my life. Fair point, Ji-hoon conceded. Across the restaurant, unnoticed by either of them, the same man from the cafe 3 nights earlier sat at the bar, nursing a drink he wasn't actually drinking, quietly photographing the two of them again. His name was Han Sung-woo, and he worked for a man named Baek Chul-min, the actual head of the rival organization whose courier Keisha had originally been mistaken for. Sung-woo had been tracking the confusion for days now, initially amused by the sloppy surveillance error, then increasingly professionally interested in what he was now witnessing. Because whatever this was between Kwon Ji-hoon and this American schoolteacher, it looked, to Sung-woo's experienced eye, exactly like the kind of vulnerability a smart man could exploit. He left the restaurant before dessert arrived, already composing the message he'd send to Baek Chul-min. Sung-woo, confirmed. Kwon Ji-hoon has developed a personal interest in an American civilian. Recommend further investigation into potential leverage. Back at the table, entirely unaware of the photographs being taken or the message being sent, Keisha was laughing at something Ji-hoon had said about his driver's inability to parallel park, the sound warm and genuine in the quiet restaurant. "Can I ask you something serious?" she said, once the laughter faded. "Of course. Is this dangerous? Being here with you. I mean actually dangerous, not my men made an embarrassing mistake dangerous." Ji-hoon considered the question carefully, weighing honesty against the instinct to protect her from a truth that might scare her away entirely. "I don't believe so," he said slowly, "but I won't pretend the world I operate in is without risk. If you're asking whether I can guarantee complete safety simply by being near me, I can't offer you that promise honestly." Keisha absorbed this, some of her earlier ease giving way to something more thoughtful. "I appreciate you not lying to me about it. I don't intend to start," Ji-hoon said quietly. "Then let me ask you something else," Keisha said. "Why me? You've got what, an entire organization at your disposal? Surely there are women in your world who'd understand all this better than a third-grade teacher from Houston who almost called the cops on you." Ji-hoon considered the question seriously, something genuine and unguarded entering his expression. "Because," he said slowly, "in 20 minutes on a sidewalk, you stood up to 2 armed men and threatened to livestream them to your TikTok followers. Because you didn't run when you found out who I actually was, you negotiated terms. Because I have spent years surrounded by people who are careful with me, who calculate every word before speaking it, and you have not once, since the moment we met, been careful with me at all." He paused. "I find I don't want you to start now." Keisha felt something shift in her chest, warmth spreading despite every rational instinct telling her this entire situation was, objectively, insane. "That might be the most honest thing anyone said to me in years," she admitted quietly. "I intend to keep it that way," Ji-hoon said. "For as long as you'll let me." Neither of them noticed the black sedan idling across the street as they finally left the restaurant an hour later, nor the man inside it, watching carefully, as Ji-hoon walked Keisha to her building, lingering at the entrance in the particular unhurried way of 2 people who weren't quite ready to say goodnight. They had no way of knowing that somewhere across the city, Baek Chul-min was already reading Sung-woo's photographs and message with sharp, calculating interest, turning over the exact kind of leverage a vulnerable connection like this could provide against a rival he'd been trying to gain advantage over for years. 2 weeks passed in a warm, unlikely rhythm: dinners, late-night phone calls, Keisha teaching Ji-hoon the correct way to eat spicy chips, Ji-hoon quietly rearranging his entire schedule around her school hours, without ever admitting how much effort it actually took. Then, on a Thursday evening, everything shifted. Keisha was grading spelling tests at her kitchen table when her phone rang an unknown number, Interracial, which she almost didn't answer, except something about the timing made her stomach tighten with unexplained unease. "Hello? Ms. Robinson," a man's voice, smooth, unfamiliar, carrying a calm confidence that immediately set every one of Keisha's nerves on edge. "My name is Baek Chul-min. I believe you've become recently acquainted with a business associate of mine, Kwon Ji-hoon." Keisha's blood ran cold. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" "That's not the important question right now," Chul-min said pleasantly. "The important question is whether you understand exactly what kind of man you've been having dinner with these past 2 weeks." "I know exactly who he is," Keisha said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the fear climbing her spine. "Do you?" Chul-min said. "Because I wonder if he's mentioned what happened to the last woman who became inconveniently connected to his personal life, or the business complications that tend to follow anyone who gets close to him." "What do you want?" Keisha said flatly. "Done with the games. I want you to deliver a message," Chulmin said. Tell Ji-hoon that his Eastern Port contracts expire in 30 days. Tell him I'd like to renegotiate terms, and that I now have considerably more leverage in that conversation than I did 2 weeks ago. A pause, deliberate and cold. Tell him I know where you teach, Miss Robinson. I know your students' names. I know which classroom is yours, 3rd floor, 3rd door on the left. I would hate for anything to disrupt such important educational work. The line went dead. Keisha sat frozen at her kitchen table, spelling tests scattered forgotten in front of her, her hands shaking as she immediately called Ji-hoon. He answered on the first ring. Keisha? What's wrong? Someone just called me, she said, her voice unsteady despite her best efforts. A man named Baek Chulmin. He knows where I teach. He knows my students' names. Ji-hoon. He threatened my classroom. There was a beat of silence on the line, and when Ji-hoon spoke again, his voice had shifted entirely, the warm, slightly awkward man from their dinners, replaced by something colder, harder, more dangerous. I'm coming to you, he said. Right now. Do not leave your apartment. He arrived 14 minutes later, and Keisha had never seen him look like this, jaw tight, eyes carrying a controlled fury that made her understand, viscerally, for the first time since meeting him, exactly what kind of man she'd actually been sitting across from at dinner these past 2 weeks. Tell me everything, he said. Ji-hoon said, his voice tightly controlled. Word for word, if you can remember. Keisha recounted the call as precisely as she could manage, watching Ji-hoon's expression darken further with each detail. Eastern Port contracts, he said finally, more to himself than to her. This isn't about you at all, Keisha. This is about leverage. Chulmin has been trying to renegotiate those contracts for months, and I've refused every offer he's made. He's using you because he thinks it's an easier path than direct negotiation. That's supposed to make me feel better? Keisha said, her voice cracking slightly beneath its earlier steadiness. Some man threatened my classroom full of 8-year-olds because of a shipping contract dispute? No, Ji-hoon said quietly, sitting down beside her, his earlier fury giving way to something more urgent, more protective. It's supposed to help me understand exactly how to respond to him. And I promise you, Keisha, I intend to respond very seriously. What does that mean? Keisha asked. Because if your version of responding seriously involves violence, I need you to understand that's not something I can just. It means, Ji-hoon interrupted gently, that I'm going to ensure Chulmin understands, immediately and unmistakably, that threatening you was the single worst miscalculation of his career. It does not mean violence against you or your students, Keisha. It means making sure he never considers this kind of leverage again. Keisha studied his face, searching for the reassurance she desperately needed, finding instead something that both frightened and uncomfortably comforted her, the absolute certainty of a dangerous man fully committed to her protection. I need to move you somewhere secure, Ji-hoon said. Tonight, your school as well. I'll have security quietly monitoring the building starting tomorrow morning. Invisible enough that no one notices, thorough enough that nothing happens to you or your students. This is insane, Keisha said, her voice small now, the adrenaline of the past 20 minutes finally catching up to her. 2 weeks ago, my biggest problem was arguing about recycling day. Now I've got Mafia bosses threatening my 3rd graders over shipping contracts. I know, Ji-hoon said quietly. And I understand if this is the moment you decide this is too much. I would not blame you for walking away from all of this, Keisha. I brought danger into your life simply by being interested in you. Keisha looked at him for a long moment, fear and something fiercer, more stubborn, warring behind her eyes. You know what? She said finally. I did not survive 4 days of you accidentally stalking me, march down to confront armed men in my pajamas, and sit through the most awkward, expensive first date of my entire life just to quit now, because some man named Chulmin thinks he can scare me with a phone call. She straightened her shoulders, some of her earlier fire returning despite the fear still evident beneath it. I'm not running, Ji-hoon. But I need you to promise me my students stay completely out of this. Whatever happens between you and this man, it does not touch my classroom. Something in Ji-hoon's expression shifted at her words' relief, and something else, deeper, more overwhelmed than she'd seen from him before. "I promise," he said quietly. "I will burn down every resource I have before I let harm reach your classroom." His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening further. "What is it?" Keisha asked. "Hey one," he said grimly. "She's confirmed Cholman's man has been following us since our first dinner. Photos, timestamps, everything." He looked up at Keisha, something resolute settling into his expression. "I need to go handle this properly, tonight, before he escalates further. Will you stay here, with security, while I do?" Keisha hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Go handle it." But Ji-hoon, she caught his hand as he stood. "Come back. I mean it. I just found this ridiculous, complicated, terrifying thing between us. I'm not ready to lose it to some shipping contract dispute." "I intend to come back," Ji-hoon said, pressing a brief, fierce kiss to her forehead before straightening. "I promise you that." He left, and Keisha sat alone in her apartment, security quietly positioned outside, staring at her abandoned spelling tests and wondering, not for the first time in the past 2 weeks, exactly how her life had gotten so spectacularly, terrifyingly complicated. Ji-hoon arrived at Baek Chul-min's private office 40 minutes later. Hae-won and 4 security personnel positioned discreetly throughout the building, every exit accounted for. Every angle considered the same careful choreography he'd learned to deploy whenever a confrontation like this became unavoidable. Chul-min was waiting for him, seated comfortably behind an expansive desk, looking entirely too pleased with himself for a man who had just threatened an elementary school classroom. "Ji-hoon," he said warmly, gesturing to the seat across from him. "I wondered how long it would take you to respond properly." "You threatened a school teacher," Ji-hoon said, remaining standing, his voice carrying none of the warmth Keisha had come to know, only cold, controlled fury. "You threatened children, Chul-min. 8-year-olds. I made a business proposal," Chul-min said, unbothered. "I simply used available leverage to ensure you'd take the Eastern Port renegotiation seriously, given how stubborn you've been about the terms for months." "Leverage," Ji-hoon repeated quietly. "You call threatening a classroom of children leverage?" "I call it," Chul-min said, "a demonstration of exactly how thoroughly I understand your current vulnerabilities, Ji-hoon. You've grown careless, letting an American school teacher become important enough to you that a simple phone call could rattle you this badly." Something dangerous flickered behind Ji-hoon's controlled expression. "You're mistaken about several things, Chul-min. First, threatening Keisha Robinson or her students was never going to result in successful negotiation. It was only ever going to result in consequences." He paused. "Second, and more importantly, you assumed her connection to me made her weak. Vulnerable, easily frightened into silence." "Wasn't she?" Chul-min asked, something almost amused in his voice. "She called me the moment you threatened her," Ji-hoon said. "Not to beg me to make it stop. To tell me, clearly and precisely, exactly what you'd said, so I could handle you properly. She didn't fall apart, Chul-min. She got angry, and then she got strategic. I suspect that's more than most of your own people manage when they're frightened." Chul-min's confident expression flickered, the first genuine crack Ji-hoon had seen since walking into the room. "The Eastern Port contracts," Ji-hoon continued, "are no longer available for negotiation on any terms, effective immediately. Not because I'm unwilling to compromise on legitimate business disputes. I have always been willing to negotiate in good faith. But because you have demonstrated, through tonight's phone call, that you're willing to threaten innocent civilians, including children, to gain advantage. I don't negotiate with men who do that, Chul-min. I simply ensure they lose the capacity to try again." "You're bluffing," Chul-min said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "You need those port contracts as much as I do." "I need them less than you think," Ji-hoon said. "And I want you significantly more contained than you currently understand. You have until the end of this week to withdraw completely from any operations connected to Miss Robinson, her school, or anyone remotely associated with her life. If you don't, Chul-min, you'll discover exactly how far I'm willing to go. And I promise you, It will make tonight's conversation feel like a pleasant formality by comparison. He left without waiting for a response, Hae-won and his security detail falling into step around him. "Sir," Hae-won said quietly, once they were back in the car, "there's something else you should know. While you were speaking with Chulmin, my team intercepted communications suggesting he'd already moved forward with a contingency plan in case tonight's meeting didn't go in his favor." Ji-hoon's stomach dropped. What kind of contingency? A man matching his associate's description was seen near Miss Robinson's school 40 minutes ago, Hae-won said grimly, before we even arrived at Chulmin's office. If this was a coordinated plan, sir, threatening her tonight may have simply been the opening move. Ji-hoon's blood ran cold. Get security to the school immediately. And get Keisha out of her apartment now, Hae-won. I don't care what protocol says about waiting for confirmed threats. Already in motion, sir, Hae-won said, already dialing. I initiated the response the moment I received the intelligence. Ji-hoon called Keisha immediately, relief crashing through him when she answered on the second ring, her voice tight but steady. Ji-hoon? Your security people just showed up outside my door. They're saying we need to move. I need you to trust them completely, Ji-hoon said, already redirecting his driver toward her building. Chulmin may have moved against your school before I even confronted him tonight. I need you somewhere secure immediately, my students, Keisha said, panic sharpening her voice. Ji-hoon? If someone was near the school, security is already there, Ji-hoon said, forcing steadiness into his voice despite the fear coursing through his own chest. I promise you, Keisha, nothing happens to those children. I will make certain of it, whatever it costs me. He arrived at her building 6 minutes later to find her already being escorted into an armored vehicle, her face pale but composed, the same fierce determination he'd first seen on that sidewalk 3 weeks ago, now hardened into something more focused, more resolute. Tell me everything, she said the moment he climbed in beside her. All of it. I'm done being protected from information, Ji-hoon. If my students are in danger because of this, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. He told her everything, the intercepted communications, the man near her school, the full scope of Chulmin's contingency plan, watching her absorb each detail with steady, controlled fury rather than panic. So what happens now? She asked, once he'd finished. Now, Ji-hoon said, his phone buzzing with an update from Hae-won. We find out whether Chulmin genuinely intended to harm your students, or whether tonight was simply meant to frighten us both into compliance. He read the message, something in his expression shifting rapidly from fear to cautious, disbelieving relief. What is it? Keisha asked urgently. Hae-won's team detained the man near the school, Ji-hoon said slowly. He wasn't armed. He was photographing the building's entrances, gathering intelligence, not preparing an attack. It appears Chulmin's plan was intimidation, not violence, a demonstration of reach, not an actual assault. Keisha exhaled shakily, relief flooding through her exhausted body. That's still terrifying, Ji-hoon. I know, he said quietly, reaching for her hand. And I promise you, it ends tonight. Whatever it costs me, whatever resources I have to burn to ensure it, Chulmin will not threaten you or your students again. Keisha looked at him for a long moment, fear and exhaustion and something fiercer, more certain, settling into her expression. I believe you, she said finally. God help me, Ji-hoon. I actually believe you. The following morning, Chulmin's formal withdrawal arrived through back channels before noon, full retreat from any operations connected to Keisha, her school, or the eastern shipping routes, delivered with the particular hollow formality of a man who understood, finally and completely, exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. Hae-won's investigation revealed the rest. Over the following days, Chulmin's own organization had grown uneasy watching him escalate a business dispute into threats against children. Several senior members quietly signaling their discomfort through channels that eventually reached Ji-hoon's intelligence network. Whatever authority Chulmin had once commanded within his own organization had fractured considerably, the same pattern Ji-hoon had witnessed before, with men who mistook cruelty for strength. It's over, Ji-hoon told Keisha, sitting across from her at her kitchen table 2 days later. The same table where the entire terrifying ordeal had technically begun with a phone call about spelling tests. Fully, this time, Chulman understands exactly what continuing to threaten you would cost him. And my students? Keisha asked. They're safe? Genuinely safe? Not just safe until the next rival decides I'm useful leverage? I can't promise you a life entirely without risk, Ji-hoon said honestly. Not given who I am, and not given the world I operate in. But I can promise you this specific threat is resolved, completely, and I can promise you I will never again allow my world to reach your classroom without exhausting every resource I have to stop it first. Keisha studied him for a long moment, weighing the honesty in his voice against everything she'd learned about him in 3 chaotic, terrifying, unexpectedly wonderful weeks. You know, she said finally, when I marched outside in my pajamas to confront 2 grown men in an SUV, I genuinely thought the worst thing that could happen was getting arrested for harassment or ending up in some weird viral video. And instead, Ji-hoon said, a small, tired smile breaking through his exhaustion, you ended up dating a mafia boss, surviving a threat against your classroom, and somehow still showing up to teach 3rd grade every single morning like none of it happened. Don't forget the community theater scream, Keisha added. I told you it was professionally trained. Turns out, I never actually had to use it, but I want that on the record. Ji-hoon laughed a real, unguarded laugh, the kind Keisha had learned, over these 3 chaotic weeks, was rare and precious and entirely hers to draw out of him. For what it's worth, he said, once his laughter faded, I've been thinking about something Chul-min said. The night he threatened you. He called you a vulnerability. Something that made me careless. Charming man, Keisha said dryly. He was wrong, Ji-hoon continued. More serious now. You're not a vulnerability, Keisha. You're the first genuinely honest thing in my entire adult life. Everyone else in my world calculates every word, manages every interaction, treats me according to what I can offer them. You marched up to an SUV in pajama pants and threatened to livestream my own men to TikTok. He reached across the table, taking her hand. I don't want to go back to a life without that kind of honesty in it. Even if it comes with danger. Even if it means occasionally explaining shipping contract disputes to a very angry 3rd grade teacher. Keisha felt something warm settle in her chest. 3 weeks of chaos and fear and unexpected tenderness collapsing into this single, quiet moment. I'm going to need you to promise me something, she said. Actual promises, not mafia boss vague threat promises. Anything. No more surveillance. Ever. Under any circumstances. Of anyone. Without extremely clear photo verification and at least 2 people confirming it's the right person. Agreed, Ji-hoon said solemnly. I've already implemented that exact protocol actually, Hae-won insisted. Smart woman. The smartest, Ji-hoon agreed. And, Keisha continued, if you're going to keep dating me, and keep bringing your very complicated, occasionally terrifying world into my very simple chip-based existence, I need you to actually meet my mama. On video call. Because if she finds out from my group chat that I'm dating a mafia boss before she hears it from me directly, I promise you. Ji-hoon, she is significantly scarier than Baek Chulman ever was. Ji-hoon considered this with visible, genuine seriousness. I have negotiated with dangerous men across 3 continents. I am prepared to negotiate with your mother, baby, Keisha said. Shaking her head slowly, you have no idea what you just signed up for. 3 months later, Ji-hoon sat nervously on a video call, Keisha beside him for moral support, as her mother's face filled the screen from a kitchen in Houston, arms crossed, expression carrying the particular skeptical scrutiny of a mother who had heard, secondhand, entirely too much alarming information about her daughter's new boyfriend. So, Keisha's mother said slowly, studying Ji-hoon through the screen, my daughter tells me you accidentally stalked her for 4 days, threatened to turn her students into leverage in some shipping dispute, and somehow, through all that, convinced her to fall in love with you. When you phrase it that way, Ji-hoon said carefully. It does sound considerably worse than it sounds exactly as bad as it actually was, baby," Keisha's mother said, though something almost amused flickered behind her stern expression. "But my daughter also tells me you showed up personally to fix your mistake, protected her classroom with your own resources, and apparently have excellent manners despite running what I understand to be a moderately terrifying criminal organization." "I try, ma'am," Ji-hoon said, with the particular careful sincerity of a man who had genuinely never expected to find himself explaining organized crime logistics to his girlfriend's mother. Keisha's mother studied him a moment longer, then, unexpectedly, smiled. "Well, any man willing to sit through this conversation instead of running for the hills has some backbone at least. Welcome to the family, Kwon Ji-hoon. Try not to get my daughter kidnapped. I intend to do everything in my power to ensure that never happens, ma'am," Ji-hoon said solemnly. Keisha, beside him, buried her face in her hands, laughing despite herself. 3 months of chaos and danger and unlikely, wonderful love settling comfortably into something that finally, genuinely, felt like the beginning of an actual life together. Chips, spelling tests, occasional shipping contract emergencies, and all. If this story had you laughing 1 minute and holding your breath the next, drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Mine's the community theater scream. And let me know where you're watching from today. Subscribe for more stories that'll make you laugh, worry, and fall in love all at once. See you in the next one.